I don't know. Anyway, so here we are today with a wonderful meeting. And if you missed last month, you know now that it was about the Royal Poinciana Fiesta. And today we're going to talk about American flamingos. Now, I think we pretty much know what a flamingo is, and you know flamingos are associated with the West Indies and Bahamas and Cayman and different territories. But I think we're going to find out that the American flamingo is now recognized as its own bird or something. Well, Tony will tell you about that. He knows more. So we're going to have Tony Pernas, and Tony is a council person for the city of Everglades City, out there, you know, in the middle of nowhere, and in Chokoloskee and all that stuff. A wonderful place. We love to go out there for the seafood festival. Of course, 10,000 other people like to go that day too, you know, but 50,000, excuse me. Oh, no wonder it's so crowded. Yeah, so. And had a long career with the National Park Service and also with Big Cypress National Preserve. And Tony is a founding member of the Florida Flamingo Working Group. So without further ado, let's welcome Tony.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
This presentation is actually like way in, so I got to back up a little bit. There we go. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the American flamingo in Florida. And I'm sure all of you that work, all of you are familiar with flamingos in Florida. I mean, you see them everywhere. They're in like advertisements, they're in place names, they're in televisions, they're in movies. I know there was like, what's that show with Miami Vice, you know, where it had that scene of the flamingos. I mean, they're like everywhere. And they're even on the Florida lottery. They're the official bird of the Florida lottery. However, the efforts to conserve the Florida flamingo actually began in 2012. And I'm going to back up a little bit and kind of tell you the whole kind of history of the whole flamingo project that we've been doing in Florida. So I was approached by one of my colleagues, Judd Patterson, who works for the National Park Service. We had an office over in Palmetto Bay, and he wanted me to take him out to Lake Ingram. And him and another guy that worked in the office were older guys, they're like huge birders. And they were really excited. They had these reports that there was flamingos over in Lake Ingram. And I had a boat and I go fishing over in Flamingo all the time. And they go, can you take us out there? So we made plans to go out to Lake Ingram, and we took the boat out there, and we saw this group of 18 flamingos over in Lake Ingram feeding. And I'm a botanist, so I'm not like a bird guy, but I was just astounded at looking at these birds. We sat there for about 3 or 4 hours, and I was just completely mesmerized with these birds. And then since Judd and Raul were birders, on the way back, I just peppered them with questions all the way back. Where did these birds come from? And that led to, well, I'm going to start talking about the rest of the time. We ended up had so many questions about these flamingos, and none of them were answered. And so I got with Judd, and we decided to put together a project, and we call it Assessing the Geographic Origin of American Flamingos. So as it turns out, there was a couple different, and you'll hear more about this, but there was a couple different schools of thought. Some people thought that these birds were non-native, and I'm going to go more into that. And then some people thought that these were native birds, and these birds that we saw were birds that were coming in from other countries. So what we did was we put together this paper, and these are our principal investigators. And the first person that I contacted was Frank Ridgely. He's a director of conservation for Zoo Miami, and we collaborated on a bunch of different projects together. So I contacted Frank, and I go, hey, Frank, we're thinking about, putting some satellite transmitters on birds. And he was all excited about that. And he goes, hey, I know where I can get these satellite transmitters, and I know which kind you need. And so anyway, so we ended up putting a whole team together, and we wrote this proposal. And being the government, working for the federal government, and we had to deal with the state governments, it's not like you just go out and catch a flamingo and put satellite transmitters on them without getting a lot of permits and going through a lot of paperwork. So we had to do like a ton of compliance. So well, we got all the compliance done, and we were good to go. And but the problem is, though, we had to catch flamingos. So flamingo observations are really rare. I mean, they just get you see kind of a few a year on eBird, and they're usually in these really remote locations. And we were rather ambitious. We wanted to catch a flamingo and put a satellite transmitter on it. So we thought it was probably going to be extremely difficult, but we did all our legwork. We had the transmitters, and we thought we had all the permits, but I'll go into that a little later. And so, but we didn't. So a little over a year and a half went by, and then we got lucky. In the spring of 2013, this big flock of flamingos showed up in the stormwater treatment area too. Everybody know what a stormwater treatment is? Okay, so stormwater treatment areas is done as part of the Everglades restoration. And what they do, all that dirty water coming out of the Everglades agriculture area where all those farms is. So what the Corps of Engineers and the Water Management District do is they get a big chunk of property, thousands of acres, and they put a dike all the way around it. And then they have pumps, and then they pump that dirty water in the beginning. And then all the vegetation, they put a lot of submerged and emergent vegetation. And so all that dirty water starts going through that stormwater treatment area. And then at the end, at the very south end, there's another pump station. And by the time it gets to that end, that water is clean. It's stripped out all that phosphorus and nasty nitrogen and stuff like that. Now you have clean water going into the Everglades. So that's what a stormwater treatment area is. And there's a bunch of them throughout Florida. But we're talking about stormwater treatment area 2. And it's west of West Palm Beach, south of Lake Okeechobee. It's kind of like on it's east of Highway US 27. So it's out in the middle of nowhere. But we have a bunch of colleagues that do work out there, and they kept seeing these flamingos, and they knew we had a project, and they let us know. And at one point, this is a photo, there was 147 flamingos in this one stormwater treatment area. So we go, if we need to catch a flamingo, this is the place where we can do it. So we had to kind of figure out how to catch a flamingo. And so we, how do you catch a flamingo? And so we did a lot of research, and we found out that some researchers in Africa, they had figured out a way to catch flamingos. And the way they did it was they used a monofilament nooses, like fishing line, the clear fishing line. And then they would put them in these sections of fence, and these nooses would float in the water. And then they put them in the area where there's a lot of flamingos, and some flamingos were walking around, they get their leg caught in the noose, and then they rush out there and you do all the scientific work they had to do on the flamingo and let it go. So we thought, we're gonna do the same thing. And we're gonna do this at stormwater treatment area 2. So we spent a lot of time, we got all these sections of fence, and we put them up, we took them out to stormwater treatment area 2, and we put them in the water. It works really well too, because the mud's kind of thick and the water's pretty shallow. So the metal actually hides into the mud so the birds can't see it. And the monofilament, the birds can't see, so it hides. So we thought, oh, we're in. And then since we've never caught flamingos before, a couple of us had those like pink lawn flamingos you guys probably seen around. So we thought like maybe we could use these as decoys and it'll attract the flamingos to where we have them. Just to let you know, it doesn't work. They were actually scared of the pink people. So we went out and we set up all these little arrays of nooses in areas where the flamingos were. Of course, stormwater treatment area 2 is a really big treatment area. It covers thousands of acres. So one day we go out, we see them feeding on that side. So we'd have to get there early in the morning before light. And we go out there, we put them in these areas where we thought the flamingos were going to be. And early the next day, they go to a different area. So we were always like trying to figure out where the flamingos were going to go. We spent days out there. We got nowhere close to catching a flamingo. So I brought a kayak out there. We thought, like, what if we could herd them? So we set up the array in one area, and then we get the kayak and we paddle really slow. And they weren't really scared of it, as long as you didn't make eye contact. You just couldn't look at them in your eye, and you go really slow. And we got them to move towards the traps. And then one day, we had one of the flamingos walked across there, and it was like, we all ran out there. We thought we got one, but it got off the trap. And so we tried for, a long time, and we didn't get one. So then we went to plan B. So Frank Rachley with the zoo, they catch birds with a mist net. So a mist net is kind of like a big volleyball net, but it's a really thin, almost invisible net, and it's on the ground. You put it on the ground, and you have a system of ropes. And then if you get the birds really close to the net, you can raise it up really quick, and then they get scared and go into that. They don't see it, and then you can run out there and grab them. We tried that. That didn't work either. So anyways, so we spent, I don't know, weeks out there trying to catch flamingos, and we didn't get any. So we were really bummed out. We were just completely, when you get 147 flamingos and you can't catch them, we're like, oh, we're out of luck. However, our luck would really change in 2015. I got a call from this woman named Rosa Maria Gonzalez. She works for the USDA Wildlife Services, and she worked over at Boca Chica Naval Air Station. And her job, it's a weird job, and you wouldn't think that people actually do this, but there's a bunch of people in all the airports around the country that work for the USDA, and her job was to scare birds. And so in some airports, there's a lot of birds around the runways. And when the planes are landing and taking off, they could fly and get caught into the engine and cause the airplane to crash, causing, and some of these jets, these fighter jets for the Navy, they're hundreds of millions of dollars, not to mention the lives that would be lost. So her job is that she goes out and before the planes take off, they let her on the planes, they're going to take off or they're going to land. And she goes out and she scares them with pyrotechnics. She's like firecrackers, bottle rockets and stuff like that. And she scares them. So when she was out there, she saw these, there were 3 flamingos feeding next to the airport. And she kept scaring them away and they kept coming back and she didn't want to, and if the birds don't go away, eventually she's going to end up having to kill them because that's what the military wants. They don't want to lose any lives. And so she knew that we had a flamingo project and she called us up and she goes like, hey, are you guys interested in coming up? And so I contacted Frank Ridgely and he basically said, oh yeah, I'll go out there. So anyways, he went out there and he went out there and he took all his equipment. He brought a box, he brought the mist net, which didn't work before, but he was going to try it again. And they went all the way out to Boca Chica and they tried to capture the flamingo. There's a picture of the flamingo right next to where one of the jet fighters is. And this is an area that was actually created. It was kind of a really bad wetland. And so the military actually spent millions of dollars restoring this wetland. So this wetland was really working. Now there was like all sorts of wading birds and even flamingos. So Frank Ridgely went out there and he was Stephen Whitfield. He just came on board. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Stephen Whitfield a little later. And they brought all the equipment, like I said, and they were going to try to catch flamingos. And here's you can see the airfield, you can see all the wetlands right around the runway, so you can see what I'm talking about. And so Frank's out there, and he's got a couple of days to try to catch all these flamingos. And here he is explaining to some of the Navy staff what he's trying to do. And they're just like, they don't understand, what we're trying to accomplish. So it was a really hard sell. And also, when they were doing this capture work, they would have to close the runway, so there wouldn't be any aircraft able to take off and land during that brief period of time. So he was actually like hindering some of their operations, which didn't really sit well with the military. So anyway, so like I mentioned, he was trying to mist net, but it was really windy those days, and so the mist net wouldn't work. And the military was really getting weary of like Frank and Stephen shut down their operations, and so they gave him an ultimatum. They gave him one more day. If you don't catch this flamingo, that we're going to euthanize that flamingo. And 2 of the flamingos are taken off. There's only 1 left. This is this one right here. And so Frank had an idea and he contacted Thomas Sweets. He works over at the Key West Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and asked him if he had any suggestion. He goes, I have a net gun. So Thomas Sweets came over and they had a net gun. And a net gun is like it's a gun and it shoots out this net that goes around the bird, traps the bird, and then they catch it, and then they're able to do whatever they need to do. In our case, we're gonna try to put a satellite transmitter on it. So they went out there, and the clock was ticking. And here's a picture of Frank took a picture of Thomas setting up, and lo and behold, Tom got it. And there's a picture up on that top left. That's Tom and Frank untangling the bird from the net. They got the bird. They put it in the crate that Zoo Miami had brought with them. And then they took it over to the Key West Rehabilitation Center because we weren't quite ready to put the satellite transmitter on, so it was vital for the time. So they kind of held it for a couple of weeks until we were quite ready. And so our plan was we were going to take it over to Everglades National Park and release the bird. And we had the permits from Everglades National Park, and we were good to go. And the reason we're going to release it in Everglades National Park, I mentioned before that flamingo in the Key West was with 2 other birds, and those 2 other birds take off. Well, during that 2 weeks when I was at the rehabilitation center, 2 birds were spotted over at Snakebite in Everglades National Park. You guys familiar with Snakebite? It's a big, flat, shallow area east of Flamingo Visitor Center. And so they were there. So we assumed that those were the same 2 flamingos that went to Snakebite. So our plan was we'll take Conchy. We named them Conchy because he was caught in Key West. So our plan was we'd take Conchy and release them pretty close to the other 2. So if it was a family group, they would be together. However, we contacted FFWG and told them our plans, and they said, like, no, you can't release it. And we go, why can't we release it? Because it's a non-native bird, and you're not allowed to release non-native bird for Florida law. So anyways, and because they consider it an escapee, and let's go into exactly what is an escapee and what is a native bird. So in Florida, there's a whole bunch of captive populations of birds that could possibly be escapees. These are all the different places in Florida that have flamingos. Of course, Zoo Miami's got a population, if you've ever been there. There's a Crandon Park Zoo, Miami Rare Bird Farm, Ross Island Reptile Farm, Bach Tower, Busch Gardens, so anyways, a long list of places that have these flamingos. And typically what they do is when they get a flamingo, they pinion it. You know, they kind of like remove a bone from the wing so they can't fly, so they'll never fly, so they stay there. Or sometimes they clip the wing so they can't fly. And so there's not an issue, except for in Hialeah. So in Hialeah, in 1931, the owner, when Hialeah Racetrack was first opening up, have you ever been to Hialeah Racetrack?
Yes.
Awesome place, and they have all those flamingos and a little pond in the middle. But when they thought it was, I mean, really good for tourists because everybody sees those beautiful pink flamingos when the race starts and everything like that. But in order to get the flamingos, in 1931, they went down to Cuba. They captured, nobody's sure the exact amount, but they captured 20 to 30 flamingos from Cuba, and they brought them back to Hialeah Park, and they released them in that little lake in the middle. It was all good, right? Where'd they go the next day? They all flew off, and nobody knows where they went. And so since that day, since 1931, a lot of the biologists view all the other flamingos in Florida as those could be escapees from Hialeah. And that population in Hialeah, actually, they went back and they got some new ones and they pinioned them. And then by 1937, they were so successful at keeping the flamingos there that the flamingos started nesting. I think it was the first time that they had actually nested in captivity. So at one point, I think the population was over like 700 birds. And Hialeah actually, all throughout the years, they have so many flamingos that they get a lot of those birds in those other parks. They all come from Hialeah. So Hialeah gets those birds and they sell them and trade them to other zoos and animal places. So Hialeah's got a lot of flamingos. So that's why it's considered non-native, because of the fact that they escaped from Hialeah. So now I'm going to back down, way back, talk about the history of flamingo. So now we know about flamingos in Florida. We know about the escapees. Well, let's talk about the natural populations. So Stephen Whitfield, he was new, but we got him hooked on the flamingo project, and him and a bunch of other folks, including myself, we started doing research on flamingos, trying to dig up on all the old history books and find out as much as we could about the history of flamingos, if there was any type of sightings. So I'm going to go through some of them. This is basically a publication called The Territory of Florida, 1837. It was by John Lee Williams. And this is the oldest record that we have. And he describes flamingos from Hillsborough Bay near Tampa and state. And one of the reasons I write that he knows the difference between spoonbills and flamingos, because I've had so many people see a spoonbill and tell me it's a flamingo. So it's really cool that he knew the difference. So these were clearly flamingos in this publication. George McCall, he was an officer in the Seminole Wars, and in Letters from the Frontiers, another publication from 1848, he describes shooting and cooking 3 flamingos near Conchy in 1827. In 1839, Audubon made a special trip to Florida. He was searching for flamingos near Indian Key, but he couldn't find them. Everybody knows who John Audubon is. He's a big bird guy. If he sees flamingo, right, it's got to be a good flamingo. But anyways, he went down there, but he didn't actually see the flamingos, but he did provide a highly detailed account of a flock near Indian Key in 1832, and writes about flamingos being present near Key West and being consumed by locals. This is one of the better ones. This is Gustavus Wurdemann. He provides detailed observations of flamingos in Florida Bay and goes into detail, and it's really, I've read this whole excerpt, it's crazy, and goes into detail on how him and a local collected over 100 birds to later sell in Key West. And they left from Indian Key and they went to an area of snakebite. And when the flamingos go into a molt, they aren't able to fly. And this guy went and they basically went up to all these birds that were in the molt, and they would just grab the flamingos, tie their legs, and they threw 100 birds in the boats, and they were just, I mean, it was, if you get a chance, read that observation from Gustavus. I mean, it was horrendous, but anyways. Yeah. And another observation, 1885, Stone wrote on capturing 4 flamingos from Warrington, Florida. This is all the way up in the Panhandle, and he reports that he sold them for food. D.P. Ingram in 1983 provided detailed observation of a flock of 2,500 flamingos from Florida Bay, as well as flamingos in the Casambas Pass area over by Marco Island. This one is The Cruise of the Bonton, written by Charles Pierce. And he basically is an account of him going out with one of the most notorious plume hunters, a guy named John Chevalier. Anybody heard of John Chevalier? There's a bay in Everglades called Chevier Bay, and basically he described large flocks of flamingos. And the important thing that we got out of this publication is Chevier telling him that the going rate for flamingo skins was $25, and the average price of other skins is between 50 cents to $10. So you can imagine $25 back in in the late 1800s. It was actually, I looked it up, it was actually more, an ounce of plumes, particularly flamingo plumes, is worth more than gold at the time. So you can see a huge demand to try to get these flamingos. Scott in 1890 reported in the Ack, that's the Journal of Ornithology, a quarterly journal of ornithology, a flock of 1,000 flamingos near Cape Sable, and suggested that they were present all year round. In 1902, Henry Howe reported a flock of 500 to 1,000 flamingos in Florida Bay. This was the last sighting of any large number of flamingos until 2013. During that time frame, there's been sightings with just a few birds, usually like less than 10 birds. So it's been a long time. This is the last huge report of birds. So that's kind of like the historical records we could dig up. The next step that we had in our research was to look up museum specimens. Scientists, we like to keep records of stuff, so somebody kills something, they want to put it in a museum and keep it forever. So the goal was to go look at these museum collections and look for physical evidence of flamingos. In the past, this would have been a real chore because you would have had to travel to all these different museums to kind of look it up. But a lot of these museums have put and are still putting all their collections online. So you're able to kind of like do a search for flamingos and then kind of look up and actually see what they had. So here's a list of the museum specimens we found. And you can see most of the collections were from, the 1800s to the early 1900s. And you can see they really drop off. They drop off after that. So the search for historical information indicates that there's probably in, the heyday, late 1800s, there might have been 1,000 to 2,500 birds present in Florida. And that these birds were here year round, that they were probably extirpated in the early 1900s. There's clear evidence that they were being hunted for meat and for the feathers. And the early 1900s was a bad time for the flamingos, but it was also a bad time for a lot of other birds. I mean, you guys know what other birds became extinct during that time. We had the Carolina parakeet, the passenger pigeon. I mean, it was just a horrendous time for birds. Back then, people killed and just kept killing until the birds were gone. So the next thing that we were looking for was there any historic, we talked about that, there's nesting, we know there's nesting in other countries, but was there any evidence of historical nesting in Florida? So Alexander Sprunk, he was an ornithologist from the early 1900s. He kind of described in writing a secondhand account of a Judge E.R. Lowe of Tavernier, and he reported flamingos sitting on whitish stumps in Sugarloaf Key in 1901. I mean, it's not positive, but it's not conclusive, but I mean, there is a report that there might be some nesting. So the other thing we looked at was oology records. You familiar with oology? I wasn't either. I mean, when Stephen Whitfield in our group, we started talking about oology. I go, oology, what's that? So it's like stamp collecting. It was like a huge thing. I mean, people would like collect eggs, they would mark them, they would trade them. I mean, it was just amazing when you look up all these records, just how popular oology was. And it was common among amateur naturalists as well as professional ornithologists. And I mean, it's just crazy all the information that's available on eggs. So we actually started looking up and we found some flamingo eggs. So here's what kind of a typical record looks like. It has a picture of the egg and some of the information. So on this particular specimen, this egg was collected by J.W. Mann. He collected it April 18th in 1886. He noted on the egg a number 585-1/1, and then he basically talked about what the nest was composed of. So he starts talking about the flamingo nest, and the description clearly matches what a flamingo nest should be. And then it talks the whole string of ownership. Since these things it talks about who collected it, and then who wound up with that egg, who did he trade it with. And inevitably it went through a whole bunch of different people, but the museum ended up at the Western Foundation for Vertebrate Zoology. Here's another specimen. There was really no information on the collector, but the date reads 1887. And basically the location, it says that it was collected in the Florida Keys. And then you see it was previously held by Manly Hardy, Paul Ekstrom, a whole different people, and now it sits at Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology. Here's another record collected in Tampa, Florida. The specimen was lost, according to the record, sometime between 1990 and 2017. It was collected by Emery Greenwood, and we still doubt the collection location, Tampa, but it's possible that was on the record. And then here's another specimen. These were two flamingo eggs that were collected in the Florida Keys, and but it's not clear, you know, who originally collected the eggs, even though it says that it was owned by Edward Wilkinson. The date was 1884, and we're not sure if these two eggs came from one nest or did it come from two nests, yeah. So that's just another way that we were kind of labeled. So again, that gives us more evidence that flamingos were probably nesting in Florida. The next thing we tried was look at recent population trends using citizen science. So, you know, the Audubon Society has that eBird app, and the website where everybody's able to report all their sightings, and you're able to kind of like search through all these sightings. So we looked through all the eBird sightings. We looked through all the Audubon field notes before the internet. You had to actually put stuff on Audubon field notes. And then Audubon, every year they have these Audubon Christmas bird counts that are well documented. And so we looked at all those records, and then we tried to come up with some population trends. So the A, that shows the people who reported observations of flamingos, so that's the number of people. B is the number of flamingos observed, and C is the maximum group size seen in a year. I'm not a statistician, but it tends to show that we have an increase in all the trends for flamingos throughout the last 50 years. So the next step is, how do we distinguish between natural dispersal? You know, because we know that there's birds in Cuba, there's birds in the Yucatan, there's birds in the Bahamas, and so we realize that some of those birds that are coming here are probably natural dispersal. But how do we distinguish between the natural bird dispersals and the escapees from Hialeah? So the three ways we could do that is through banding records. So, you know, ornithologists, they like we were doing, they like to catch things and put bands on their legs so they could identify them in the future. Yeah, that's the bird I caught. So they put bands on them. The next way was through stable isotopes. And the last way was through telemetry, what we were trying to do with the birds in the SDA too. So we started looking up through all the records in eBird, and we found 3 records of banded birds, and all these 3 banded birds were from the Yucatan. There was one that was captured, you can see the little square on it. It was a DFJV, and it was photographed and put on eBird, and it was from December 2002. There was an HRTJ bird from the Yucatan, and it was photographed and put on eBird in September 2010. And DPDA was put on eBird in October 2019. So clearly birds are dispersing because we managed to catch 3 birds from the Yucatan. The next thing we want to try is utilizing stable isotopes. And stable isotopes is a powerful tool that's used in ecology, where you can look at the isotopic ratio of different elements in hair or feathers. And in hair, you can actually look at one end of the hair and the other end of the hair and kind of make a difference. But the feathers, you know, they put the feather out at one time, so you'll just get one reading for the entire feather. And we thought we could use it as a way to distinguish between wild and captive birds based on the diet. Because the captive birds, like the ones at Hialeah and all those other places, they're eating, it's not really Purina bird chow, but they're eating some sort of like, you know, pre-made meal. Whereas the wild birds have like a more of a natural diet. So the idea was by looking at the feather samples, you'd be able to make a difference. Tell the difference. So we collected feathers from captive birds from Lion Country Safari, from Hialeah Park, and from Zoo Miami. And then we collected wild birds, feathers from wild birds and museum collections from the past 150 years, and we analyzed them. Then we collected feathers from Florida birds of unknown origin, and we're able to determine if that bird is a wild or a captive bird. So if you can see all those little green dots up in the top, yeah. So those are all the captive birds, so that's captive. And then all the purple dots, those are the wild birds. And then the birds we looked at are the red ones, and we kind of go into a little bit. So Conchy is right here on the bottom. See them on the bottom left here? So Conchy, we had feathers from Conchy. Conchy is clusters with the wild birds. And then we have EVR 1834. You see it kind of like there in the middle. That was a bird that was found dead by a biologist over on Card Sound Road. Nobody knows exactly, you know, where it came from. but it was put in the museum collection, Everglades National Park. And that was that clumped with the wild birds. And then there was another dead bird that was found in Dry Tortugas National Park. And we had the skin from that bird and the feathers. And then that bird also basically like clumped with the wild birds. And then you mentioned all those bird sightings and snake bite. So the biologists would go out and collect the feathers after the flamingos in that area. And so, but those birds were kind of a little scattered. Some of them clumped, like a snake bite one clumped with the wild birds, yet some of the other ones clumped with the, with the collected feathers from the captive birds. So a little bit of a difference in. The other thing that we're working on to try to kind of figure this thing out is working on population genetics. We're currently working with the University of Central Florida. They're collecting feathers and they're working on genetics. And hopefully we'll have some results from them too, some conclusive results. But it's kind of like when you guys go to ancestry.com or what's the other one? 123, what's it called? 23andMe. So anyway, we're doing the same thing. So hopefully we'll be able to use that info. When we get that completed, we'll be able to tell some of the origins from the genetic work. So we talked a lot of stuff, but we forgot about Conchy. So let's get back to Conchy a little bit. The last time we were talking about Conchy, FWC wouldn't let us release them. You see all that information that we provided? Well, we provided it to FWC, and they said, okay, you can release them. So they gave in, and so we were able to release the bird. So we took Conchy, took him out. Here's myself and Frank and a group, and we basically took him out, put the bands and the satellite transmitters on him. We got in a boat. We took him out to where the two birds that we presume were the birds he was with over the snake bite. And here's Frank letting the bird go over a snake bite. And there's a picture of Conchy just after we released him. He's got that blue band. That's the very first banded American Flamingo, US 01. And then the satellite transmitter on the back. And then the satellite transmitter, what it does is like it 4 times a day, it obtains a GPS signal, and then it stores that signal. And then every few days when the satellite's in the right location, it'll upload that, and then we have the data on Conchy. Here's another picture of Conchy, where he was released sitting, and he's probably like, I've been in a bunch of different spots in the cage. But anyways, he's free now over at Snakebite. And then amazingly, we started getting that satellite signal. So here's the satellite map. And the yellow dot is where we released them. And then we got 2 signals. We got one on the right over by Snakebite, and then one over to the left. If you guys are familiar with Everglades National Park, pretty close to Clubhouse Beach. And then trouble. One of the park rangers was driving on the road over by Flamingo Visitor Center and found Conchy on the side of the road, and he was in real rough shape. He was almost dead. So they contacted me. I contacted Frank. Frank came over. They picked up the bird and they took it back to the zoo. Frank, by the way, even though he's director of conservation, he's also their vet. So he kind of like did some work on it, and they found out that he had a bad case of liver flukes. When he was hanging out in that little wet area next to the airstrip, there was probably a high concentration of liver flukes. But the zoo, luckily, they have their own population of flamingos and they know how to treat flamingos, so they treat them. And after a couple weeks, he was ready to go. So we took him out to release him. We were gonna, but Everglades National Park now wouldn't let us release him in Everglades National Park, was because he was a rehabilitated bird, and the Park Service doesn't like to release rehabilitated wildlife. So we thought like, okay. So I was working for the National Park Service at the time, so I know where the boundary is. So we went over to Tavernier and Isla Morada, got in the boat, and we could see the marker where the Everglades boundary was. Birds don't know the difference for boundaries, and we released them outside the park, and so we released them, and it was really cool. So I see if this video plays. I always have bad luck with videos. Here we try. Start starting. Is it all in up on?
Yeah, the vote on He's gonna play again, but let me turn it hold it here.
Maybe.
So click on this.
Got it. All right, we're good. All right, so now I'm going to show you Conchy after we let him go. So the yellow dot was where we let him go the second time, and then he quickly flew into Everglades National Park, and he wound up on this island. And so there's all those islands in Florida Bays. A lot of people don't know that, but a lot of them have just kind of like a mangrove fringe, and the interior is this saltern, which is kind of like this really area of highly salty water. And I think it was perfect for flamingos because Conchy hung out in there. And I'm gonna just go show you. He really liked that. Yeah. And then you can see some of his movements. As all the little red dots will show up, that's where he wound. That's basically all the uploads from the satellite. And you can see now he's expanding his territory. And then we actually had one of the biologists from Everglades National Park. They saw him and they took a photo and they sent it to us. And then you can see now there's more and more. He keeps expanding his range in Florida Bay. And that was March 2016. He's moving around quite a bit. And then now it's like he's already up to snakebite. So now you see he's already all the way up to where we let him go the first time in that snakebite area. And that's in April 2016. And the cool thing is in April 2016, when he got the snakebite, somebody took a picture of him with another flamingo. So Conchy's got a buddy now. And then there's another picture that somebody took of Conchy and another bird flying around. And you can see the dots just keep expanding all over Florida Bay. So Conchy's using Florida Bay. This is June 2016, another picture with somebody else took a picture of him. And you can see the dots, he's just utilizing Florida Bay, moving everywhere, October, November 2016, December 2016. And so he's all over Florida Bay, and he's using all sorts of like habitats. He's utilizing coastal mud flats, mud banks, this interior of those islands, like I was talking about, those salterns. And it's just amazing all different habitats that Conchy is using and how much we're learning. Those are all different habitats. And then more flamingos with Conchy in July of 2017. This was another shot from eBird somebody took. There's another shot somebody took of Conchy in the snakebite area. But then now we're having an issue. So Hurricane Irma was forming Category 5 hurricane. You probably all remember Hurricane Irma. And it was like aiming right towards Everglades National Park in Florida Bay. And so we were kind of really worried. Conchy was hanging out in these two islands just before the storm hit. And then Hurricane Irma hit. And as you all remember, it was a pretty bad hurricane, a lot of damage. So we were kind of really worried that whether or not Conchy survived. And immediately after the hurricane, we got our first upload, and we got two shots from, two locations in Snakebite, and we also got a location in the middle of Florida Bay. So we thought like Conchy's okay, but then the transmitter stopped. We lost all communication with the satellite transmitter. So there's three possible scenarios we're thinking about. That Conchy was in really deep water, satellite transmitter's here, so maybe it was underwater and it wasn't transmitting, or maybe the transmitter failed, or maybe Conchy didn't survive the hurricane. But then in November of 2017, somebody took this photo over in Snakebite, and there was this group of flamingos, 5 flamingos, and we zoomed in, And if you zoom in on that flamingo on the left, that's what appears to be the transmitter. So we weren't positive, but we think that it was probably, it wasn't the first one, the deep water, it was probably a transmitter failure. But we've never ever gotten another signal or report of Conchy since that one time. But the good thing is we learned an awful lot from Conchy. We know that flamingos can live year round in Florida Bay. We now have data on habitat use and movement patterns throughout Florida Bay. And the thing we didn't get though, we always thought that Conchy would go to Yucatan, go to the Bahamas, you know, go to Cuba, and he didn't. So that's the only bad thing. We were kind of really hoping there'd be some sort of like long distance dispersal event that we could document, but we didn't get that. So, but anyways, we had a lot of information from all that stuff that we gathered, and our group put together, led by Stephen Whitfield, we put together a paper and submitted it to the Condor, the Journal of Ornithological Applications. And we were hoping that this journal article would lead to effective change. And we think it did, almost like right away. Notice this page is not found, the one that says that flamingos are non-native. So, so FWC kind of like is now on our camp, so it's all works really well. And so the next thing we wanted to do, we thought that flamingos deserve some level of protection. So in June 2018, Zoo Miami and a group, we petitioned the FWC to add flamingo to the list of endangered species in Florida. You would think that flamingo would be on some sort of endangered, either a federal or state species list, and it wasn't. In December 2018, FWC said the petition had cleared as a letter and we're good to go. And the official decision was going to come by December 2020. Well, it took us a while. A couple years later, we finally got it, and FWC declined our petition to list flamingos. It's pretty unfortunate because we actually believe that the flamingos deserve protection and a recovery plan. But we understand, you know, FWC's got a lot of birds that are listed and there's like limited staff and time, and it might be kind of a heavy lift. But the good thing is though, from the FWC report, is that they correct those misconceptions about the population history. It does say now that you're probably extirpated by hunting and they were once present. And they want to, FWC wanted to coordinate monitoring with us or other folks that are doing monitoring. It identified scientific knowledge gaps, habitat use, residency times, captive and wild origins, and state that, you know, it may change if something changes with the population of flamingos, particularly if we get a hurricane that might wipe out the populations or sea level rise in the future. So it says that, you know, the flamingo recovery is going to be encouraged, but they're not going to take responsibility. So what are our next steps? So as a group, you know, we're trying to figure out what recovery of the flamingo in Florida would look like. So you can see we've kind of had natural recolonization, and we can just kind of wait. We could have, you know, additional birds coming from, you know, Bahamas, Cuba, and the population could slowly begin to grow, and maybe they'll start recolonizing some of the historic nest sites in Florida. Or the other thing we thought about doing is we could do translocations or reintroductions. And that's basically going out and getting flamingos from the Yucatan, Bahamas, or Cuba and deliberately releasing them in Florida. And translocations have worked. They've done these in the British Virgin Islands and other locations. So it might be complicated, it might not succeed, but that's one of the things we want to kind of look at. And so another thing we want to do in the future is do additional telemetry. We had some birds come back to SDA2, so we're still trying to catch it. We got better technology now, so we still want to catch a bird in SDA2. We want to hopefully get the results back from the genetics. And then we've been working on carotized feeding and nesting habitats for flamingo in Florida Bay. We've been going out to everywhere. We're trying to go out to everywhere where we see flamingos feeding and just try to find out exactly what it is they're feeding on. Just this last time they were in SDA2, we had biologists that was working for the water management district. They went out to the site where the flamingo was feeding and picked up some samples trying to determine, you know, what flamingos are feeding on. So if you guys want to stay current with flamingos, if you're on Facebook, we have the Florida Flamingos Working Group, and Zoo Miami also has a conservation and research page on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So I highly encourage you, if you guys are on there, just to join those groups and kind of stay current on what we're kind of doing. And with that, I'm closing up. I want to give a real big thanks to the whole steering committee with the Florida Flamingo Working Group, and particularly Stan Whitfield, who's the chair of the organization. We got a lot of really smart, great scientists working on this working group. The whole goal of the working group is to kind of like conserve flamingos, not only in Florida, but throughout their areas that they inhabit. And all the other people that, you know, in order to do work like this, it's not just one person. It's even though it's a steering committee, we got a whole group of people that have done work on helping flamingos. So I want to acknowledge all of them too. So thank you. Do I have time for questions?
Tony, let's mention that people that are on Zoom can ask a question in the chat area on that. So, and questions from the floor.
What's the lifespan of a flamingo?
Up to 40 years. So they're rather long lived. Particularly the ones we know the most about are the ones in captivity, of course, you know, because everybody's having captivity, but they can live up to 40 years. Sure.
Yeah, let's say for argument's sake that you released the bird inside the park, even though they were explicitly against that. What trouble could you have gotten in?
I mean, the average
Picture.
Federal prison, right?
the average person, I don't know, it's probably not going to be that much, but for an employee, I was an employee at the time, you know, it wouldn't have been a good
Could have been a
career move.
pension issue. Yeah.
However,
Now I'm retired, I can do whatever I want.
two-part question. If you had not alerted them to releasing and released it, would you have, if it came out that you released it without asking?
There probably would have been some sort of disciplinary thing.
If they got it?
Is it true that they get their, the coloring from shrimp?
Yeah, carotenoids. Basically, you know, as they're basically digging around, they get all those little shrimps and stuff like that, and the crustaceans. That's what gives them the color. So, like the ones that are in Hialeah, where they don't, I mean, they supplement it a little bit with some carotenoids, but those are a lot lighter color. They're almost like a whitish color. Whereas the darker, you can see the ones in the Yucatan and the Cuba and the Bahamas, they're really like dark pinkish orange.
Rob, a
I
question
have
from
someone
Zoom?
asking on Zoom, how large are the eggs?
4 inches?
It's hard to tell from the picture.
It's about maybe like 3 to 4 inches long.
You had a ruler next to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
They're asking what types of food they eat.
They flamingos in the wild eat like this. You know, they're filtered. They basically they sweep their heads back and forth. They got this really weird way of feeding where they kind of like turn their head upside down. They fill up their beak with the material, then they squeeze the water out. But algae, insect larvae, even tiny fish, plant material, I mean, a huge array of stuff that they find when they're doing that feeding.
And they do tend to prefer high salt, shallow water.
Yeah,
And so that must be an environment where the krill do well.
the little shrimp and
Yeah.
stuff like that. is probably a
Naturally,
lot
that's where they go and that's where they nest and that's their
main
natural
habitat. Yeah.
Are there any at the new parrot jungle?
Are there any what?
Well, you know, here on this property was the parrot jungle.
And they had
And
flamingos.
they ran them around for a little show.
I would assume they're at the new parrot jungle, but I haven't been.
I haven't been.
I would assume they're there.
They closed it. The Jungle Island is
They
not,
closed
Oh, it's
it?
closed?
yeah, it's not open to the public, Jungle Island. It's only just maybe for rentals, for
In a big
weddings.
Yeah.
Yeah, since COVID.
That's sad. It was so beautiful.
It was nice. I like the one here.
Yeah.
Will you pursue further efforts to protect flamingos, according to Frank?
Yes. Yeah, that's what they're doing, the Florida Flamingo Working Group, and that's our goal. And that's like all these scientists that are on that group, our goal is to protect and conserve flamingos.
Have you been able to travel to some of the areas in the Yucatan and Cuba and Bahamas?
I've been to the Yucatan, but I haven't been to Cuba or seen the population in the Bahamas.
Okay, so in the Yucatan, was it also the shallow
Shallow,
salinas
same
kind of
thing,
tidal
exactly.
pools?
Same areas, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have been to Inagua several times, and I think it's the largest population of West Indian flamingos.
Yeah, they had a really bad, in the Bahamas this past year, they had when the flamingos were nesting, they had wild hogs are an invasive species and they
Oh,
were
my
present on the
goodness.
island, and they went out into the flamingo area and they killed thousands of little juvenile and ate the eggs and stuff like that. So it was a really bad situation in the
Yeah,
Bahamas. for
but
the
they were
flamingos.
pretty much left alone. Nobody went out there in Inagua.
Yeah.
And so that's a shame about the
pigs,
hog
yeah.
population catching on.
Yeah. So now the Bahamas National Trust and others that work from the Bahamian government on conserving flamingos, they're working on
Eradication of,
just trying to curb them. So well, that won't happen again.
yeah.
Is the coloring different between the male and female?
No, roughly the same.
It's whatever they eat.
Yeah.
The Tortugas one you said had died, you got information, was that the one that's like 20 years ago? Or was that
Yeah, it was a while ago, yeah.
That was on the Tortugas when one lone flamingo landed. The rangers went crazy.
Yeah.
And I got 15 feet probably on a kayak.
And so there's been other sightings in the dry Tortugas, and we assume that when they're coming from the Yucatan to Florida Bay, that they've passed over the dry Tortugas.
I saw one flying over, I was coming back from Key West in April. A lone bird flying, I don't know whether that's towards southeast, west, whatever it is, towards Florida Bay, coming that way.
It's a great sight. They're beautiful in flight, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. Wonderful. Well, I think we'll all stay in touch a little bit and figure out what happens with the flamingos. It's really amazing how much work it took to go out there and try and catch one, and the man hours
A lot of man
before
hours.
you ever got the Conchy bird were just amazing, huh?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, that really speaks highly of volunteers who are willing to do that sort of work. And then finally, I guess, getting recognition that there was an American flamingo, or that it's not just a visiting species of bird. And if we could, before you get away, we have this $1 million plaque. Maybe it's worth a little bit less than $1 million, but I rounded out the numbers. Just as a sign of our appreciation, Tony. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yes,
it.
right, and we hope to see you again. Thanks for coming.
To pose together?
Oh, we got
Oh, yeah, we gotta do that,
Maybe
right?
take that off your chin.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Perfect.
And let's thank Cesar Becerra, who's with us in the back today, for helping us arrange the programming. Cesar knows a lot of interesting people.
He does.
And I think that we owe him a wonderful debt of gratitude for scrounging up interesting people. Thank you, Cesar. Thank you. So we have no meeting in August. You're officially given the month of August off. And then we'll send out an email about September 10th, the second Saturday in September. We'll come back for another program. It looks like we may have B. Brickle.
No, Matt Stock for September.
Oh, Matt Stock is a famous photographer who shoots photos of the Everglades.
At night, abandoned vehicles in the Everglades, really fascinating story.
And then in October, we'll have the program that was canceled about the Drake Lumber Company and Gaston Drake. We'll have our speaker back for October. And then November, it looks like we might have B. Brickle. We will have. Okay, so that takes us through November. And December, maybe we'll just have a party or something. And so anyway, thanks a million to the folks here at the library for giving us a place to do our program. Anybody who's not on the email list, if you want to stay in touch with what we're doing, of course, you can always check the library. They'll have our schedule, or see Marlene at the desk over there. Marlene is our treasurer for life, and she really does a great job of keeping track of all the members and bothering people to pay. So when you get a note from her, send us $20. So all right, thank you, everybody.